that is comprised of people from the world over, from every walk of life, from every tradition of faith. It's hard to imagine that it's happening in America, but it is happening in America. To tell people of color, born in this country, to go back to where they came from. To describe Klansmen and neo-Nazis and white supremacists and white nationalist terrorists as very fine people after they have marched and chanted, "Jews, you will not replace us." Someone in his maiden speech for the highest office in the land, the greatest position of power and public trust, who describes Mexican immigrants, though they commit crimes at a lower rate than those born in this country, as rapists and criminals, constantly warns through incessant repetition of invasions and infestations, and calls people human beings, and let's be clear, the most desperate and vulnerable human beings, fleeing the deadliest countries on the face of the planet, showing up here without a dime to their name, without any prospect of hope or advancement, except that they came here to this country of asylum seekers and refugees and immigrants, this country known by the Statue of Liberty. He calls them animals and predators and killers. And this May of this year in Florida, as he warns about this invasion, and he asks the question to the assembled masses, what are we going to do to stop these people? And someone yells out, shoot them. And the crowd roars their approval. In the face of that, the president signals his consent. He smiles, he laughs, he encourages more of it. Every single year for the last 3, hate crimes have been on the rise in this country. Those counties that hosted a Donald Trump rally saw hate crimes increase by more than 200%. I want to make clear to you, to us, to the country, that what he says and what he does not just offend our sensibilities or our understanding of the traditions of this great country. It changes who we are as a country. You do not get kids in cages until you've given people permission to put them in cages by calling them animals and seeking to dehumanize them. You don't lose the lives of 7 children in the custody and care of the wealthiest, the most powerful country on the face of the planet unless you have made it possible. And you do not get somebody driving 600 miles to come to this community, in his manifesto repeating the very words used by the President of the United States to justify this act of terror and hatred and violence and death. And yet in the face of this, our institutions have failed us. And in this democracy, none of us can take any comfort or feel in any way superior because all of us are part of the institutions. Whether it is our legislatures, our Congress, the press, social media, they're all comprised of all of us. But they have been impotent in the face of the gravest threat that we have ever known. One that we experienced firsthand here in El Paso a week ago Saturday. It's almost as if the bigger the lie, the more obvious the injustice, the more furious the pace of this bizarre behavior, the more incapable we are of seeing it and clearly naming it and acting against it. This attack on El Paso is an attack on America. It is an attack on our ideal of what America can be. An America that has not been for so many in this country based on their race, their ethnicity, their country of national origin, their gender, their sexual orientation. As Langston Hughes said in his poem about an America that was not an America for everyone, it's the land that has never been yet and yet must be. It is in this land, in this very community, after the election of this president, at LBJ Elementary, that a third grade student approached us and asked, why does the president not like me? It's in this country, in Houston, Texas, when I retold that story, that a family came to me and they said it resonates with us because we have a third grader in our home. She's not Mexican American, she's Muslim. And she wonders if there's some other country we're supposed to go back to. Though she was born here, though she's a U.S. citizen here, though she's just as American as anyone else. When we allow this country to be defined along lines of race and ethnicity and religion, we allow a commander-in-chief to not only welcome that, but the violence that follows, to defy our laws, our institutions, and any ethical or moral boundaries. The end of that road is the end of this idea of America, the end of an America where every single one of us could belong and have a future. I'm confident that if at this moment we do not wake up of truth, I, for one, see more clearly than ever that in a country that has 320 million people, but 390 million firearms, that we have too many guns, too many people who own them and use them and threaten us with them right now for the good of this country, for the good of the 40,000 of our fellow Americans, our fellow human beings who will lose their lives to gun violence this year and every year going forward until we change course. And I see more clearly than I ever have that not only do we need universal background checks, not only do we need red flag laws that would stop somebody when they pose a danger to themselves or someone else, not only do we need to end the sale of assault weapons and weapons of war that were designed for the battlefield and have no place in our communities, but we must, as a country, buy those weapons, take them off the streets altogether. There are millions of them today, and their ability to inspire terror, to make our kids and your kids afraid to walk into that classroom at Mesita or El Paso High, because we know as a country we've accepted the murder of 6- and 7-year-old children where they sat at school. We've accepted high school students being hunted down in the halls of these institutions like El Paso High right behind me. It is time for us to be bold, to stand together, to stand up against those interests who would prevent us from saving the lives of our fellow Americans. It is more clear to me now than it has ever been before that when we do not make progress on the human dignity of our fellow Americans, the ability to work a job and just one job, not 2 or 3 because you're paid a living wage, to be able to depend on health care as something that's a right that you don't have to worry about so that you're well enough to live to your full potential, to know that your community, that you and your family count. Not only is it the right thing to do to make sure that this country is realizing its full potential and promise for every single one of us, when we fail to do that, we provide fertile ground for the kinds of demagogues that we have in office right now, who will use your fear and your frustration against you, against us, against one another. Demonize immigrants and minorities. Blame them for the problems that you have. I see more clearly now than I ever have before that immigrants in this community, in this state, in this country, will continue to be attacked, not just killed as they were at the Walmart, but terrorized as we just saw last week in Mississippi. 600 people who came to this country for the privilege of working the toughest, shittiest jobs that no one else here would allow their children to work, in chicken processing plants, in picking cotton and working in the gin, working 2 or 3 shifts, maybe making a minimum wage if they're lucky, far too often their immigration status used as leverage against them to pay them something far less or nothing at all. This has in part caused this kind of treatment of the people who make America great, who are part of who we are, who are the very fabric of our lives. And the response to that is no more being defensive or being on the back foot or apologizing for who we are and who we want to be. It is using the example of El Paso, Texas, and showing that when we legalize those who are in this country, when we free dreamers from any fear of deportation by making them U.S. citizens, when we elevate the asylum seeker, the refugee, that person who has no other hope or choice but to come here, not only is it good for them, it is great for the United States of America and fundamental to any success or strength or safety or security we could hope to have. And I see more clearly than I ever have before that if we do not tell our story, others will tell it for us. This proud community has to tell the world just who we are and what made us so special. And to remind ourselves that though we have something absolutely extraordinary here in El Paso and Ciudad Juarez, though we are separated by hundreds of miles from the other centers of power and population, as Martin Luther King reminded us, we are all caught in this inextricable, inescapable network of mutuality. We're tied in a single garment of destiny. Sooner or later, the challenges, the problems of this country will come find you as they came and found us on August 3rd. So telling the full and real and true story of this country, just who made us great in the first place, on whose backs America was built, and whose descendants could profit from it, and whose descendants were virtually locked out from it. And knowing that and confronting it directly, clear-eyed, gives us the best chance of writing the next chapter of that story, whose ideal and goal and vision must be true and real equality and equity for every single one of us, every single American treated with the dignity and respect that they're owed as Americans, as human beings, just the way that we do it here in El Paso, Texas. Monday, Amy and I took Ulysses and Molly and Henry to school. This morning, we rushed them out the door. Janine gave them a ride to Mesita and to Wiggs. And I got to tell you, there's some part of me, and there's a big part of me, that wants to stay here and be with my family and be with my community. I love El Paso. There have even been some who've suggested that I stay in Texas and run for Senate. But that would not be good enough for this community. That would not be good enough for El Paso. That would not be good enough for this country. We must take the fight directly to the source of this problem, that person who has caused this pain and placed this country in this moment of peril, and that is Donald Trump. I want to be the leader for this country that we need right now and that we do not have. Someone who will not only not tear us apart, but do everything within their power to bring us together. Someone who doesn't inflame, but instead heals. Someone who doesn't work with fear, but instead hope. In other words, I want to be the kind of leader for this country that El Paso has raised me and taught me to be. But as we head back on the campaign trail today, I know there is a way. I know there is a way to do this better. And that came to me last week. Someone asked if I was going to be heading back to Iowa to go to the Iowa State Fair. Corn dogs and Ferris wheels. And I said, no, I can't go back for that. But I also cannot go back to that. The kind of challenges that we face in this country at this moment of crisis require an urgency unless we want to reap the consequences of failing to meet them. Consequences that we lived and I hope learned from in El Paso on August 3rd. And so to those places where Donald Trump has been terrorizing and terrifying and demeaning our fellow Americans, that's where you will find me in this campaign. From El Paso, we're heading to Mississippi to be with those families who have lost a loved one temporarily, maybe for the indefinite future, because of the hostility of this administration towards immigrants. And I want to be there to help lift them up, to tell their story, to remind this country just who we are at our best. Anyone that this president puts down, we're going to do our best to lift up. And those communities, so long forgotten, counted out, not counted in to begin with, we're going to go there as well, not only to learn about their challenges and their problems, but as is so often the case, to learn from them about the solutions to their challenges and their problems, their solutions to our challenges and problems as a country, places all over the country, places like El Paso. Though we bore the brunt of this attack, of this hatred, of this pain, I will take the courage and the kindness, the warmth, the strength, the resolve of this community with me, and I will share it with the rest of the country. Because we in El Paso, and I hope that we as Americans still believe that though we have not realized the idea of America for everyone, it is still within our grasp, and we, the people of the border, can lead the way. Thank you all for coming out here today. Thank you for what you do. So grateful to be with you. Gracias. Thank you all very, very much. Thank you. Thank you all.